Okay, in this video, I'd like to talk about Bruce Gernon and his anomalous flight through the Bermuda Triangle back in 1970 when he was piloting a small private Beechcraft plane with him and his daughter and one other passenger from Andros Island in the Bahamas to Miami. A trip that normally took him 90 minutes and is a distance of 250 miles. Bruce, on this particular flight, encountered a vortex tunnel in which he flew through and exited and was able to tell the tale of what happened because he had all these space-time anomalies and nothing made sense on the ground when he landed, and nobody can figure this one out because science hasn't figured out this key thing right here, these two components. This is everything. So let's get into this video. Okay, back in 1970, December 4th, Bruce Gernon takes off from Andros Island in the Bahamas, and immediately at about 1,100 feet, as he's climbing, he hits his weird-looking cloud, but he flies out of this one. But shortly after that, he hits this other cloud. But this is unlike any cloud that he's ever encountered before because this whole system goes into rotation like this around his plane. And he sees all these lines rotating and going into this corkscrew. So he can't figure out what's going on, but he just keeps on flying. And he sees all this weird lightning, and all of a sudden it's just darker than he's ever seen it before, but he keeps on going. And his plane's still running. And he loses all his instrumentation, his radio doesn't work, and everything goes haywire. And his compass actually starts spinning to the left. Okay, so what happened is when Bruce entered this tunnel, Bruce basically entered the dead center of a magnet, because at the dead center of a magnet, just like at the dead center of this ring magnet, there's no magnetism. It's pure dielectricity, or counter space, or 0 point. There's no magnetism getting to that point. Okay, on a magnet, all the magnetism is around the peripheral, on the outside. There's no magnetism in the center. It's pure dielectricity. So what Bruce did when he entered that tunnel is he went into counter space. You have these two things to work with. You have space and you have counter space. Magnetism is represented by the toroid. Dielectricity is represented by the hyperboloid. Magnetism is space. Space is magnetism. Counter space is dielectricity. Dielectricity is counter space. These are the two conjugate pairs that make up everything that you see going on, with the plane of inertia in between, because everything is triplicate. Everything is 3, 6, 9. Everything is triplicate, not duality. Space is represented by phi over the Fibonacci, 1.618. That's the golden ratio, with a spin to the right, okay? Space is visible light. It's like a white hole. You have light speed, you have a push, and you have time. This is everything you see in the visible universe. This is space. This is everything that you can't see. This is counter space. These are the two dimensions you got to work with, space and counter space. In counter space, everything's spinning to the left because everything is doing the 0.618. Okay? Counter space is dark. It's a black hole. You got faster than light because you're dealing with the torsion field. So it's a pull, basically like a vacuum or a drain, because it's all running off pressure mediation, and everything is draining into counter space or wanting to be pulled into that vacuum. So when Bruce's plane flew into this thing, he's getting that pull from counter space or from the dielectricity. So when he got to Miami, he arrived there in 47 minutes, a flight that should have taken him 90. And he had over half his tank still full of fuel. So nobody could figure out what was going on. Because science can't figure this little deal out right here. They figured it out in the 1900s pretty well. And that's why your electric grid is functioning today. So Bruce, he basically got into the ether churn, and that's when he's seen all these lines start doing this and going to this corkscrew. Because what Bruce did was he did this number right here. Bruce flew through a black hole, which he entered, and came out a white hole, which he exited. Because he said when he exited this thing, it was pure, like whitish fog. And like I said, he had no radio communication, and all his instrumentation went haywire inside this tunnel, because you have to have two things to have electricity. Without these two things, electricity doesn't function properly. Your electrical components aren't going to function properly in Bruce's case, and you're not going to have electricity. You have to have these two things because they're the conjugate pair. This is making up everything running the universe. You have to have magnetism and you have to have dielectricity. Without one or the other, you don't have electricity. When you have magnetism and you have dielectricity together in the right geometric form, then you have electricity. So it's the synergy. Two conditions always produce a third. Going back to the triplicate. So, when you're in pure dielectricity, you have no magnetism. And your instrumentation is not going to function properly. Just like when a UFO lands close to somebody's car and they go to try to start it, they can't because there's no magnetism getting to their system. And it's pure dielectricity in that area. And then when the craft leaves, their car will mysteriously start back up because all the magnetism has come back to that spot. Okay? That's the same effect that they have with the lifters, with the T.T. Brown science behind all that stuff. With the lifters, they'll put a whole bunch of voltage behind this thing and make it go anti-grav, and the magnetometer won't be able to read the Earth's magnetic field in that area for a given amount of time before all the magnetism returns. So that's what's happening. When Bruce entered this thing, and his compass started going crazy, his compass was actually spinning counterclockwise or to the left. Okay, because he was in dielectricity or counter space. You're dealing with anti-time because it's doing the 0.618 to the left. So that's why his compass was going left, because he's in counter space. See how the spiral to the left? When you're in space or you're in magnetism or you're in time, everything goes clockwise. That's why your watch spins to the right, because you're in space and you're in time and you're in magnetism. So when Bruce came out the other end of this thing, he was able to get on his radio and contact the tower. Now, at first, the tower couldn't see him. He was radar invisible. They could only hear him when they got out of the tunnel. And they told him he was in Miami airspace. And nobody could figure it out on the ground because this plane only went 180 miles an hour. So they said he jumped 30 minutes forward in time and 100 miles in space. Because, like I said, he got sucked into the pull. he got pulled into the drain of counter space. So his plane was going faster than it usually should have, because he went through the tunnel. Basically what he did is, this is a toroid, he basically entered a black hole and exited through a white hole. So Bruce had this term that he used to describe it. He called the electronic fog, but I'm going to correct it and say that it's dielectric fog, because you're not dealing with electromagnetism. You're dealing with dielectricity. It's the complete opposite. It's ether churn. So what Bruce did can be represented with my spinning delta T. This represents magnetism and dielectricity. It's my 3D model of reality. So when this thing is spun up, going fast enough, you can see the hyperboloid or the hourglass shape. That's dielectricity. That's counter space. That's where Bruce jumped into. When you spin it up fast enough, you see the toroidal or the circular or the magnetism. Bruce flew dead center into this thing, just like flying dead center into a magnet, and went into counter space. It's the complete opposite of space. You got your three things: your space, your counter space, and your plane of inertia in between. Positive, negative, neutral. So that's how everything is functioning in this whole deal. It's the same deal that's happening out at Skinwalker Ranch. I just watched this little episode on YouTube where they're trying to figure out what's going on with the vortex over Skinwalker Ranch. And they can't. Or at least they're not going to tell you on TV. But this is what's happening. When they drop these GPS trackers out of a helicopter over the vortex, and the computer, they had all kinds of anomalies with their flight and their instrumentation. Same thing that Bruce said. Because they're dealing with counter space. When they dropped all these GPS trackers out, and the computer started modeling this thing on the screen, immediately the computer started drawing this hourglass or this hyperboloid shape. And they can't figure out what it is. And then it goes into these spirals. Okay, so you're dealing with the dielectricity, or the dielectric or counter space, or 0 point. It's faster than light. It's the torsion field. And science can't put 2 and 2 together to get 3. So I'm putting it together for everybody and telling y'all that there's no dualities in nature. Everything's triplicate. 3, 6, 9. Positive, negative, neutral. Thanks for watching. If you haven't seen my other videos, please check them out. Have a good day.